Hello, I'm Nathan Stuke. Welcome to Wisper University. My attempt to help depart as much information on people out there in the world, learn from other people's mistakes and experiences. And this year, we're talking with some pretty influential people in the industry. And today I have Shane, and I'm not going to try to do his last name. I'm going to let him do that introduction. So Shane from Calix, he's the Senior VP of Product Development. So Shane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how to say your last name?
Thanks, Nathan. So Shane Eleniak, lots of vowels, lots of E's and I's and A's. I'm fortunate to be the senior executive responsible for products at Calix. So I've got product management, product strategy for the company, and then development, solution test, and cloud operations for all of our premises and cloud products. And been doing this since 1990. So I've been doing it for a little while now, and been in the industry since 1990, and been with Calix for about 6.5 years now.
6.5 years. So 1990. Wow, that is a long time, and technology has completely changed. Since then. What kind of got you into that? What's kind of a little bit of your background as far as like your history with technology?
Yeah, so my initial so I started off doing software when I was in engineering. Some of my first jobs. So I graduated from electrical engineering actually before there was computer engineering courses, and I'd always been a hardware software guy, and started doing C programming and DSP programming, and then went to work for a service provider. Actually went to work for TELUS. So I'm Canadian, and
okay.
I'm from Canada. And just, it was an exciting time. There were, Sonnet was brand new, fiber networks. We were looking at high-speed internet services, over-the-top TV services. The internet was brand new. DSL then was brand new, and kind of lived through all that, but really got bitten by the bug of the technology and what you could do for customers. And this idea of ultimately communications is just an incredible enabler for communities, right? I grew up in Alberta, and we've got a couple of larger cities, Edmonton and Calgary, but then we've got a lot of rural communities and a lot of farm communities and oil and gas and lumber, and just you can take some very remote places and just make a real huge difference by delivering communication services into those communities. And that was probably the biggest thing for me, was just watching the change and what you could do and how you could take a community that in many ways was isolated, right? May not even have a hospital or doctors, limited from education, and just watch it over time. Now they're connected to the top universities, some of the top cancer and heart doctors in what would normally be big cities. And I think it's the same story. I've been in California now for 20 years, and you see it all the time. I live in the Bay Area, so we got access to just incredible resources. You get out into other parts of Central California and small towns, and communications is everything. All of a sudden you're taking a Wharton finance course or an MIT machine learning course. You're talking to a top medical person in their field, and you're doing it from your home or from your community, right? And it incredibly does flatten the world. And for me, it's people like yourselves that are bringing those types of services to these types of communities. But you see firsthand what that does and how it changes the equation for so many communities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife is from South Africa, so when I started Wisper, I would get up like at 2:00 in the morning when I got the notice on my phone saying we had an outage, and I would leave and I'd go fix it. And my wife's like, "It's 2:00 in the morning. Who needs internet?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody's working with somebody who's in Europe, and it's not 2:00 in the morning, and they have to be connected." So I would leave, and it wasn't until we went back to South Africa. And at that time we had dial-up. Holy cow, 900 milliseconds to the rest of the world. And we were leaving to catch our flight. It was a 5:00 in the morning flight. We were catching an early flight, and the internet was down, so we couldn't check the status. This is before cell phones and everything. We were just going to check the status online, and we couldn't check. So we showed up at the airport, and it was like a 2 or 3 hour delay for the flight. Whereas if we had known that it was down or known that the flight was delayed, we could have not gone so early, hung out with her parents more. And I was like, see, dear, that's why the internet matters at 4:00 in the morning, 2:00 in the morning, because you never know when somebody's going to need it, once we've had this connectivity, it's so important.
Yeah, and we've all become used to now. All of a sudden, you can check anything. You can find anything. You can check anything, and it just changes the way you live and what you're able to do, right?
Yeah, so I think that's awesome that you started in kind of as a first with a service provider, and now you're helping provide products and solutions to a service provider. Thinking back to what you kind of know, like what is something that you would say, wow, I wish if I was starting an ISP today, I wish I would want to have known this. Is there anything that you can see from, I mean, you've been through multiple iterations of the internet, right? From dial-up when it was Gopher, right? We didn't even have Netscape at that time. It was Gopher and all those things all the way up to now. People have got gigabits and fiber everywhere. What's something looking back that you're like, gee, if I would have just known that back then, it would have been different?
I think it's kind of, it's the classic thing you talk about in that change takes longer than you thought it would, but the impact is greater than what you thought it would be.
Okay.
And I think it's the two balancing that point, right? Because I think sometimes it's easy to get disheartened that says, well, maybe it isn't going to be as disruptive. And when you look back, it's incredibly disruptive, right? You named some disruptions that were just huge. They take a little longer, right? But when they, I'm a big tipping point fan, and I'm a big believer where you can feel when things tip. And when they tip, it really accelerates, right? And I think you have to look for that tip, and you can start to feel when something's starting to tip. And I think it just takes longer than you'd like, but when you does tip, it happens fast. And then the disruption is just incredible to watch, right?
Oh yeah. I love is it Malcolm Gladwell? Is he the one that talks about the tipping points? Yeah, I love his books. I love when he talks about that. And then you go back in history and you try to, follow when they are and what it is. So no, that's great. That's great. So the product evolution at Calix that you've seen, you've been there for 6.5 years. What do you like the most? Like, what are you most proud of, or what do you think stands out that you're just like, hey, we got this right?
Yeah, I think transforming a company is always challenging, right? So we've done a number of transformations. We went from being a classic, systems company. When I joined the company, it was 15 years old, really well established, great set of customers. And we wanted to become a software and services company and a software platform company. So both on the back of a network OS, on a premises OS, and on a cloud-based infrastructure. I really like our cloud infrastructure. We collect about 12 terabytes of data a week and really bring that into insights for people like yourself, right? On what's really going on, what is the subscriber experience. But I'm really proud of what that allows a service provider to do. Really getting an insight into what is the customer's experience, what is the subscriber's experience, and then how do you make that optimum, right? And for me, what I'm excited about is, we've talked about QoE, we've tried to measure it, MOS scores, a lot of different things, and it's never been really easy to say, but here I know what's going on in my network. How do I correlate that to a real customer experience? And I'm starting to feel like we're putting the standards in place, the objects, the telemetry, the analytics, to actually be able to say, no, this is a really good experience. The subscriber with his computer doing Zoom, this is their real experience, right? And what I'm most proud about is just what that allows you to do. And I think, subscriber experience is everything. I think we all strive in the industry to give subscribers a great experience. And I think we're starting to get the telemetry, the instrumentation, the analytics to do that in real time, right? I think we've all looked at data, warehouses, lots of data, and tried to look back to say, okay, well, what should we have been looking at? What gauges? And I think we're finally getting to a point now where you can start to look at that in real time. And I think that's going to really change the way how you deliver services, how you monitor them, and how you react to changing customer needs. I use a couple test cases with my data science people going, if you're a grandparent and your kids and your grandkids move back in your house, is the system smart enough to tell me that? And then, if something like COVID unfortunately happens and now all of a sudden it becomes your office and your school, is the system smart enough to tell me that? Those types of changing needs. And I love the grandparent example. You see it all the time, right? And someone's kids and their grandkids move back in, and their needs change that dramatically. Would we proactively see that, be able to talk to them and going, hey, I think you'd benefit from a higher speed package. You'd benefit from some of the other things we do. And how do you get a system that's smart enough to say, I think this subscriber has changing needs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point. So my background is in software development and database design. I love data. I love crunching it. And I remember back, I graduated in 2000, and then, for a couple years before I started Wisper, I would go in as a consultant and I would help all these people set up their database. I wrote the software to do it. And then my question, because I had a master's degree in business administration, I'm like, so how are you going to use this data? What do you want to do with it? And they're like, well, we just need to collect it. I'm like, you're just collecting it. Yes, but why are you collecting it? Well, that was what I was told I needed to do, was write a system to collect this data. And I think now what I've seen, especially with your guys' system and other cloud systems in general, is that people are realizing that collecting the data is just the first step. Actually analyzing it and learning from it and understanding what it says and not believing some of the things it says, because sometimes data you can analyze it the wrong way, and other times you can do it the right way. And so I'm real happy with how you guys have really taken that approach to a data-centric, help us make really good decisions. And in anything we do in business, the more data you can have that isn't paralyzing, because I would not want to have to look through 12 terabytes worth of data to figure out what's going on in my network. But I would love to see the dashboard that says, hey, you might want to look into this, or you might want to do that. And I think you guys have nailed that really well. And I'm excited to see even what builds off of this now.
Yeah, we talk a lot about actionable data. And I think that's the key part of it is it actionable? Am I collecting it? Am I correlating? Am I turning it into insights? And then is it clear what actions to take? Is it actionable, right? Because I think the challenge we've always had with an industry is we've collected a lot of data, but it was really hard to make it actionable. It wasn't clear what to do with it or how to tie it into actions, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. We were just going through some stuff here at Wisper trying to analyze some data, and I was struggling with why we had a lot of new employees and why they weren't seeing what they needed to see. And I realized that the data wasn't telling the story. My 18 years of experience on top of the data was telling the story. And it was like, I could see it so clearly. And then it's like, oh. So our data really isn't that valuable to them, where it's super valuable to me. How do I make our data tell the story that someone who isn't as experienced can get even better information out of it? Better, because mine's more of a gut feeling than a true, like, this is what's going on. And I think you're right. You have to make sure that it's actionable. And I like that, actionable data. It's no good just to have data. You have to have it actionable.
Yeah, I think that just sets the right connotation. And for me, that's probably the most exciting, in whether you look at, TR396, 369, whether you look at data elements 2.0, I think we're starting to see an industry and an ecosystem that's forming that says we're all going to be able to look at subscriber experience and be able to actually make it actionable. And I think that's exciting. I think that's exciting for the communications industry.
Yeah. So I'd say, shifting gears just a little bit, the disruption, right? So you guys are kind of taking an old system. You talk about your transition where, hey, we were a hardware company, made amazing hardware, right? Top notch, unbelievable. And now we've set out to disrupt and really help service providers provide amazing service. How do you go about looking for that? Like, what is there something you're out there pining away, always searching and dreaming about? How do I disrupt, or anything you can help small business owners in that process of finding that disruption and what that innovation, I guess, is, what you can call it as well?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this idea of DV for us, which is disruptive value. And really what we're trying to figure out is it disruptive? And I look for sustainable disruption, but is there value? And I think if you start on the value side of it, like, I'm a huge lean fan. And I'm a big believer, go look for the value, talk to your customers, and figure out where the value is to them. Where's the high value? Where's the pain point? And if you start on that axis, then you can start to bring smart engineers into it to look at disruption and innovation and, hey, we could do this different. And if that's the problem they're having, But I think if you start on the value side, because I think too many people start on the disruptive innovation side of it, trying to look for problems to solve. And I always start with value and problems and pain points. And I think if you figure out where your customers' pain points are and their highest value, then you can start to look at what, innovative ways to solve it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, because I know when I was an IT consultant, I could go in and ask the company, all right, what do you need from IT? Oh, they would tell me a little bit. Well, we need laptops that are faster. We need whatever, but they really couldn't grasp like what a software system could do for them or what a new one. So I realized early on, okay, I just need to learn your company, where your pain points, what is working, what's not working, and how do you do your business. And then I was able to analyze it and then apply my IT mind to it and say, wow, I could automate that 4-hour process for you. Really? You could? Yeah, we can get that automated. And they're like, I didn't even know. They would not have known to ask.
Exactly.
But because I was not asking them where their problems were, I was asking just how do you do business and where could I add value? So that's great.
Yeah, and I think if you understand if you work with your customers to understand their business needs, their changing business needs, where their pain points are, then you can start to bring, well, hey, we could actually bring different approaches, different innovation, different disruptive innovation, and solve the problem different. Because I think a lot of times the people who understand what's possible don't understand the pain point, and the people who really understand and are living the pain point don't even, to your point, think that, hey, well, no one else has ever talked to me about doing that, so I'm not even going to ask because I don't even think it's possible, right?
Right. Oh, this is just what we've always done. I mean, I was told it took 6 hours. I got it down to 4. Why would I do any better? Oh, no, you can get it down to 10 minutes. What? Really? How?
And then we look back and go, well, that was incredibly disruptive, right?
Yeah, right. So you mentioned something kind of in your introduction that, the transformation that Calix has gone through. And I know you've scaled up a lot of employees. And I think, COVID has brought on, in a good way, I'm always an optimist, COVID has brought on that internet is so vitally important. I haven't met a Wisp yet or an ISP that isn't just growing as fast as they possibly can to try to either grow the existing customers, get them for better service, or expand into new areas. Any insight from you as to some of the things you went through kind of scaling Calix that might help somebody scaling their business? Something you kind of looking back, you're like, wow, if I would have realized that earlier, I could have done it differently or better.
Yeah, I think it's never too soon to start to invest in processes. Culture is incredibly important. I think we were successful because we recognized that early on, right? And that we needed, if we were going to, keep the customers that we have happy and attract great talent, we needed to have a great culture. But I think, I'm a technology guy. I'm an engineering guy. Process doesn't feel sexy, doesn't feel, but I think very quickly you realize as you do things at scale that you've got to build the processes behind it, underneath it, as the foundation, right? And for us, that was, our AIM process, how we did concepts, validation, lean, agile, our cadence models. And I think investing a time to go slow to build those processes out and extend them, and recognize that everything we do in a company is really a set of processes with our customers on both sides of it, right? My ideas and concepts come from working with my customers, and then ultimately the success of delivering software and services comes from what our customers can do with it. But I think, really investing that and then recognizing your customers are really on both sides of that and an extension of your processes, and building your processes to take into account how do we work with our customers? How do we understand their needs? And then how do we work with them to successfully adopt software and services, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always forget to tell our audience that they can ask questions. So I'm going to say, hey, if anybody has any questions, put them in the comments and we'll get to those. I have a couple more for you while we're waiting to see if we have some of those. So you talk about process, just in your experience, changing an existing process, and I would say not just tweaking, I would say changing, versus creating a new one, like there never was a process to get this done. Which one's easier?
I think they have different challenges. I think the advantages of, it's hard to create something from scratch, but the beauty of it is you don't have any preconceived ideas. So you're not dealing with any type of inertia. We're going, hey, we don't have a process. It's a white sheet of paper. Now that can be challenging in that it's a white sheet of paper, but it's also very liberating in that it's a white sheet of paper, right? Whereas I think improving processes, it appears, I think that looks simpler to people because more of the paper is drawn, but I actually think it's harder because now you're fighting inertia and change and some of human nature that says, well, yeah, but that's not how we do it. So I think ultimately, optimizing, I think it is harder, even though it looks easier.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I always find it amazing that I'll find out a policy or procedure. I'm like, well, why did we do that? And they're like, well, that's because that's the policy. And I'm like, we got rid of that policy like 5 years ago. How are you've only worked here for a year. How do you even know about that?
How do you even know this exists, right? And that's the way it used to be done. Exactly. And I think that's the harder in that there's just, there's more learned behavior, there's more inertia, there's more antibodies, and it's harder to change things because people just know it the other way. Whereas if you introduce something totally new, everybody's like, yeah, we don't have a way to do it. We all each do it a little bit different. So when you do introduce it, people are like, oh, great. Hey, now we have a process to do that. I think once you get through the initial, well, that's a whole white sheet of paper. That's going to be really hard to create. And once you get going, I think it's actually a lot easier to do that. But you got to, I think it just looks more daunting out of the gate, right?
Yeah, and I found that even if the change is better, even if we make your job easier, there's still a little bit of either the fear of the unknown or just, I had trained myself to do it this way, I forgot and something. So yeah,
I think it's that's one of the things I keep reminding myself. Everybody goes through change and goes through the stages of change, right? Some people do it very quickly. Like I love change, so I move through the stages pretty quickly. But I think
early adopter.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of like innovation and change and disruption and, just the way I'm wired. But everybody goes through those same stages and same processes. And I think it's just recognizing that that's kind of the way humans are wired. And that's the way we deal with change and adopt it and synthesize it. And I don't think you can overemphasize and repeat it because it's that repetition and reward for adopting change and behaviors that I think just reinforces to people that change isn't a bad thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a question here from Tom. He says, in reference to the pain points where we were talking about kind of working with customers' pain points and dealing with those, what's your best start small advice?
Yeah, I think it's literally, whether you call it product market fit or fit, like I pare it down to the smallest possible use case. And I really want, I'd like to get very granular, very fine grained. And even if it's part of a bigger use case or part of a bigger process, I like to kind of tease them apart as small as you can. And really go through the detail, and then you can start to build things up and go, well, this kind of overlaps with this, and we can add these together. But I think it, counter to how we, it's human nature to want to lay out the whole thing, and I think it really, really pays off starting with just really the small use cases and every little step, and kind of work through it, understand it, and then figure out where the pain point is. Is there real value to that? Is there real differentiation to that? And then you can start to group things. But don't, I think it's like good brainstorming. Don't start to group things too early.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think back to like when I started Wisper, and I had like we didn't even write it down, but I had like a kind of a one-page idea as to what Wisper was going to be. And we were going to provide service to only business people, and we were going to do all these things. And if I had taken the time to write out the 80-page, business plan I have now, it would have been wrong, and two, it would have been useless. So I like that concept of kind of starting small, and you never know, like especially when you're brainstorming. A lot of people come into a brainstorm with the idea that they already want to try to solve. And it's like, whoa, let's take it even a step back. Yeah. I don't know where we're trying to solve. Let's just throw out ideas. And I've seen that there's no bad idea. People seem to think there are, but sometimes it takes two really bad ideas, as in like, holy cow, that'll never, whatever. But then you put two of them bad together, that sparks somebody else. And now the third idea, you're like, brilliant. How did we get there? It's like, oh, well, we talked about riding horses to our customers' installs, because we didn't want to use gas. And we ended up with doing a customer install, or, whatever it ends up being. There's all kinds of ways to get there.
But I think, to your point, not being afraid to just slow down, break it down, go through the detail, start with the smallest part of it. Because, if you don't preconceive an answer, you can be really surprised how things group together and where the kind of the discussion takes you, right? So, I think it's human nature to start to try and synthesize and stop listening and start solving the problem. And I'm a big believer in just tease apart the problem, understand the detail, the pain point, and make sure you've got the smallest parts fully fleshed out before you move on to the next one. Because when you come back and start looking at how and disruption and innovation and what to do, there's lots of different ways to solve things. And I think we all rush to solution and wanting to solve problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, my wife being from South Africa, it's interesting going back there and talking to her and talking to other business owners as well, that they have a different upbringing. Oh, you're from Canada as well. So you think just a little different, not a bad way, not a good or a bad way. But there's certain things that you've accepted that this is the way it is. And then I haven't accepted that. But then there's other things I've accepted. Well, I just nothing I can do, or I don't have to worry about that. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's amazing where all the different perspectives, ideas go through and whatnot.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me see. We got one more question here. I'm trying to start. Okay, so he says he's in an area that has very little to no service. He's trying to start at my neighborhood. I say that's awesome. That is exactly the way to do it, because in your neighborhood, one, your truck rolls are really close. Two, you can walk down the street with a ladder if you need to. I've done that before, where I was doing an install and I had to borrow the neighbor's ladder because my fold-up ladder wasn't tall enough out of my 86 Honda Accord. And I went to the neighbor and I asked him if I could borrow the ladder. He's like, what do you need it for? I'm like, I'm doing internet. And he's like, oh, well, you can borrow my ladder only if you'll do my install next. I'm like, okay, done. So I just walked down the street.
And I'm a big believer in, communities and how nodes and community and start to connect, right? And to me, 300, 350 is perfect, because you're talking about really a node, a community, similar care about similar needs. And then you can start to connect those together going, I bet you there's another neighborhood that's next to it that's another 300 or 350, who again probably has very similar, and you can start to view connecting these together, right?
Yeah, and I like the neighborhood idea, especially when you live there, because you don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to be like, oh, I've got this perfect plan. You can go out, and if you have some bumps in the road, you have some outages or whatever, while we don't want those, you're still trying to figure things out. And if it's your neighbor, they're not going to come over with pitchforks and everything to tell you you're just like the cable companies, you're horrible. They're going to be like, oh, what do you need? What's the problem?
Exactly.
Oh, our other neighbor was
what problems are you having, right? And
Yeah. So I think that's great. So Tom, more power to you. Go out there and crush it. Get those customer service. So that's great. All right. Well, Shane, any last things you want to share with us? Any other takeaways? Anything popped into your head? Maybe something I didn't ask the question about? I really appreciate you being on with us.
Yeah, no, this was fantastic. I love talking with you. This was a great opportunity. I'm excited about where technology's at. I feel like I've been saying this every 10 years. I'm always excited about what's coming next. But I think we're in a special time. I think smart towns, Zoom towns, whatever you want to call them. It's exciting to watch. Really the world. The North America flatten out. and what you're able to do at the community grassroots level, but also just what a game changer it is for communities when you bring in those types of services and access to just basically everything in the world, right? And I was a big fan. The world is flat, the earth is flat, right? But we were talking manufacturing at the time, right? And now we're talking about, no, it doesn't matter where you live. You can take that MIT course, you can take that Wharton course, you can be a software developer, you can launch a CSP, you can do whatever you want just by what communications technology allows you to do, right?
Right. Absolutely. Cool. Well, I appreciate you being on with us. Hopefully this was helpful for some people out there. It seems like Tom is ready to go. Hopefully everybody else enjoyed it as well. And just thank you so much for being on, Shane. Reminder, everybody, you can catch us on Facebook or our YouTube, Wisper YouTube channel. And we appreciate you being here and look forward to having you on our next session. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.